really good to be here with live humans. So thank you so much. I think I'll just say a couple things about the book, and then I'm going to turn it over to my my betters. And this book was really a love project where I wanted to have a conversation that I wasn't seeing happen in the rest of the food world, in the rest of the literary world, in the rest of even kind of community practice conversations, in terms of multidimensional food stories that where people of color did not have to feel like they had to perform a kind of tourism for the white gaze or for any other gaze, and could really, I was hoping that the writers who so graciously dived into this project would be able to explore a topic that they wanted to explore, and that could be as idiosyncratic as they wanted, and they did not have to think about, well, will this be palatable to white readers? Will this be threatening? Will this be, I just never want to work that way. That said, in the editorial process, we did have to ask questions of many of the writers, like, well, can you explain this? Because even though we're not working with, a white gaze, we don't know each other's stories. So that was really also the purpose of this project is I wanted to know more about each other's cuisines and each other's relationships to whatever their food stories were. One of the writers who ended up not being able to make time to write a piece, she was born in a refugee camp, and she really wanted to write about hot Cheetos, and I was like, yes, that's what we need. Like, you don't have to write about ancestral cuisine. You don't have to write about your kitchen. It can be whatever you want to write about that is significant to you. And so these writers did an amazing job. They gave us all such a gift. The stories are really everything. You'll laugh, you'll cry. It's cats. It's young people don't know what that is. Gen Xers unite in our terrible cats memories. There's vulnerability, there's social critique, there's politics, there's just really everything. I also wanted to just center troubles too, like things that were troubling to each of us about food, or things that maybe not were necessarily troubling, but were absences that we could write into. Things that we wanted to amplify that were either about our community or about our relationships to our communities. And as we are all together in this environmental crisis, in this industrial food crisis, in this, in this health crisis, it just seemed to me like I was just really excited to have these conversations and listen to the wisdom of these really beautiful people. So with that, I am going to turn it over to our first speaker, who is Sugi.
Thank you so much, Sun-Yung. And it's such a pleasure to be here in person with my fellow contributors, with members of the community who support this bookstore that I, for a very long time, lived around the corner from and just love. And so I'm so happy to be back here. This is my second in-person event. Still getting my sea legs under me a little bit. So as an example, I had a copy of this book that I gave to a person who appears in the essay. And then I also moved offices, and the other copy is who knows where. So I'm going to read off of the sheet of paper and through my mask. So my previous food writing career, before the advent of being edited by Sun-Yung, a good thing that should happen to you if you can manage it, is I was a food blogger of sorts for a South Asian blog called CPM Mutiny, which was very popular, I guess, in the 2000s. And it was the first time that I wrote about food not for a white gaze. And it was really fun because I would just go, whenever I travel, I always go and look for the Sri Lankan neighborhood, and then I see what kind of fusion they have. So I would go to Malaysia, and I would order what the commenters on that blog would tell me to order. I would go to Paris and eat like naan du fromage, and I would write about it. And I would also, it was in that space that I began to get a little bit into media criticism. So I also started to take on some mainstream media that described Sri Lankan food in ways I found disturbing. And then as I was working on my second novel, I discovered that I had a lot of sort of food anecdotes that I wanted to shoehorn in, but they didn't really fit. And they kept being sort of funny in a way that was not correct for this particular novel. I should say I'm not particularly funny as a novelist. And so I wanted to have another place to put it in. And Sun Yung asked me for a piece, and so there are some jokes in here. And I was asked this morning in a virtual interview that a couple of us did, sort of how I thought about making jokes about food, and I thought, like, what a pleasure to make jokes with an audience with whom I felt so safe. Because I think food is really funny. It's sort of an arena for mistakes and slapstick. At least I'm perhaps revealing too much about my own kitchen. Anyway, I will read just a little bit from my essay, which is called The Measurements, with thanks to Sun Yung, my colleagues in the anthology, Minnesota Historical Society Press, and the bookstore. The Measurements. I went to learn about the war. I wanted to learn exactly what it was, but no one could tell me. Some people did not want to tell me, and others knew they could not. If you don't know which war I mean, wait, I'll tell you. Or better, you can figure it out. Often the person telling me about the war ate as they talked. Sometimes when I was younger, I listened so quietly they barely knew I was there. Later, sometimes I cooked for them. Sometimes they cooked for me. Sometimes, if we were both activists, we cooked and talked about politics together until we knew each other well enough for whatever was necessary next. Eating is an intimacy. This is why when one Sri Lankan politician betrayed the other, people learning the story repeated to each other in astonished tones, they had just eaten appam together that morning. I grew up in the 1980s, in the middle of potlucks and dinner parties as people discussed the war. Do you know which one I mean yet? Up and down the east coast of my childhood, the talkers talked and ate off of those styrofoam plates with little compartments that keep your curries segregated. Who wanted their curries segregated? I don't know. Some of the talkers, even those related to each other, and sometimes especially those related to each other, did not agree about the war. Some of them learned to avoid talking about disagreeable subjects. Others learned to agree. Others eventually stopped coming to the potlucks and dinner parties and temples and celebratory and ethnic functions. The children ate too and listened. We drank soda, orange soda, Coke, Sprite, or 7-Up, out of styrofoam cups. We crushed the plates and cups without knowing that they were bad for the planet. We slid them into trash cans, hoping that our mothers, or even other people's mothers, who in those close quarters minded our business too, did not notice if we failed to eat everything they had put on our plates. Will you consume the story you were given? Will you wait for more? Do you know what went into your food, in what amounts, what it cost? Or did you eat what appeared without thinking? I did. After we ate, the children waited for dessert. We wished for something easy and sweet. When it came, ice cream and waddle-uppam and pineapple fluff, which if you have not eaten it, has an appeal akin to how I imagine Narnian Turkish delight. We ate it and listened. My knife skills come from sous chefing for my mother, who learned to cook after emigrating. She never taught me how to cook anything, not with exact measurements and not with any exact amounts of time. Just watch, she said. Are you watching? Perhaps she was a little impatient with my desire for exactitude and my desire to be told. If you watch carefully, she said, you will see how it is made, what exactly is going on. You taste the curry as you are cooking by tapping it into the fleshiest part of your palm, below your thumb. Nothing will burn you there. Are you surprised? haven't you seen me do this 1,000 times? And I do call my mother when I cook, even when I know how to make the dish, and it's like maybe 30% to annoy her, which she knows and which we weirdly both enjoy. I'm very grateful for video chat. My parents took us to a Sri Lankan restaurant in New York City. We had never been to the restaurant before, but my father nodded at a man at another table. He nodded back. "Who is that?" I asked him. "I know him," my father said. "The tigers killed his brother a few years ago." I remembered the story. The candlelight in the restaurant flickered. Years passed before I learned that the Sri Lankan ambassador, too, liked to eat there. I wondered which sets of politics crossed paths over plates. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Thao, pronouns he, him, and I'm so honored to be a part of this book. And when I heard that there was a call for stories about immigrants, refugees, and food, I knew I had to submit something. And so my piece, which if you're not Hmong, you probably cannot pronounce, but it's the Hmong pronunciation is Manje Gle, and it will not look anything like that on the page, so that's my chapter. And so Manje Gle is basically rice mixed with water, and it's something that, you know, we do to help like little kids like eat the rice, and like even like amongst Asian cultures, like a lot of my friends who are Asian non-Hmong, they're like, why the hell would you ever eat that? Like just plain water and rice. But in my piece, it starts by kind of explaining that, and I kind of trace that history of the role of rice and the simplicity of rice and water in the Hmong community, and then I really unpack my relationship with food, my issues with food, and how that really paralleled my relationship and my issues with my own identities. And coming to terms with trying to understand historical trauma in the Hmong community. So that's kind of where I pick up on what I'm going to read, and I'm just going to read a couple pages from kind of the later part of the book. Food became my everything, my stress reliever, my comfort, and my confidant. Minnesota winters with 8 months of the year below freezing made me want to inhale comfort food, pack on the pounds, and hibernate until May, allowing the fat stores to keep me warm. I don't know if any of you know what that feels like. I gained more than 40 pounds over the next few years when I lived in Minnesota, until the scale reached a number I'd never seen above my toes, 205. My BMI score danced around me like a plump, fat-shaming tooth fairy, taunting my 5'7" frame. After that, I decided to take control of my health. High blood pressure and high cholesterol run in my family. Both my parents have it. My paternal grandmother, died of a heart attack. I made a conscious decision that that would not be my fate. I trained for a mini triathlon, which I did 2 years in a row. The following year, I completed a 25-mile bike ride for the American Diabetes Association. I was feeling stronger and healthier, but my blood pressure and cholesterol were still high. I realized I was not alone in facing these health issues. I have so many Hmong friends who also struggle with health concerns. In the sauna at the Eastside YMCA, I often overheard Hmong elders complaining about their chakaji, which is diabetes, or katavu, which is gout. Every Hmong person I know has an uncle or auntie with diabetes or gout, or has it themselves. After living in America for over 4 decades, the Hmong community is experiencing soaring rates of diabetes, heart disease, gout, and many other chronic conditions. Compounding the issue is that advice from Western medical practitioners tends to contradict our Hmong diet and culture. For example, a friend of mine shared with me that she went in for a physical and her white doctor told her to stop eating rice. How the hell am I supposed to stop eating rice? She exclaimed to me. I think about the number of times I've heard that same medical advice. Similarly, Western doctors advise gout sufferers to not eat rich foods like beef, seafood, or pork. I understand the validity of this guidance. But these well-intentioned suggestions are offered within a vacuum that separates us as Hmong people from our histories, our families' traumatic journeys to the U.S., and the sacrifices our parents have made to put food into the mouths of their beloved children. The seemingly innocuous recommendations for what we should and should not eat negate the trials our families have endured to provide rice and meat for us. Rice has played a critical role, central to who we are and our existence. Rice is one of the few threads woven through the story cloth of our lineage, even as history books continue to erase us from global memory. When we have had nothing to feed ourselves or our children, at least we had manjakle. Saying don't eat rice and don't eat so much meat is a slap in the face to Hmong families who have fought for survival from the jungles of Laos to the streets of America, only to face racism, xenophobia, and hate crimes. To mothers and fathers toiling in factories and fields, underpaid and taken advantage of. It is a slap in the face to my mother. Her hours spent standing in assembly lines turned to decades, eventually tearing apart her shoulder and decimating her knees, forcing her to have shoulder surgery and her right knee replaced. These are the sacrifices our families have made to put rice and meat on our tables, to fatten us up, to ensure we would never starve again. Food is how Hmong parents show love. Most of us go a lifetime without parents or elders ever telling us they love us verbally. But every single day, whether we're upset or we've just gotten into a fight, they will still ask us, did you eat yet? Even after criticizing how much weight we've gained, they will force us to eat more. Recently, my mom turned to me in the kitchen and said, "You are so handsome." I stood still as a deer, ears perked, waiting for what I knew was sure to be a punchline. She continued, "If you just lose 20 more pounds, you will be even more handsome." There was the arrow to the heart. She then ordered me to eat the sugar-coated donuts she had just pulled out of the fryer. This is how Hmong people show love. Radical hospitality through food, through hosting, and through building community. I'm not saying medical professionals should stop giving us advice. Rather, they need to get to know us, learn our history, experience our radical hospitality, move beyond the Western medical frame and integrate holistic health and wellness. Then together, let's address the serious chronic illnesses that are plaguing our communities through strategies grounded in our inherent resilience. Don't punish us for surviving and blame our ailments on us. We are warriors and cultivators of the soil who have been systematically forced off our land and murdered for generations. We don't need advice given in a vacuum. We need ways to be reconnected to all that has been lost. To heal chronic illness, we must first heal the wounds that have ruptured our connections to our ancestors and to the land that has always provided for us. Only then can we truly be nourished. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Lina Jamoul, and I really want to thank Yung Shin for including me and all of us in this just beautiful book. The thing that really strikes me is about in Yung Shin's introduction of narrative scarcity and narrative plenitude. And I grew up and came of age at a time of narrative scarcity where you kind of do the erasure to yourself. So I used to lie and say that my mom was American and my name was Olivia. And then beyond the narrative, then like maybe even worse than the erasure is the stereotyping. So the Arab terrorist, an American marrying an Iranian and losing her daughter to his family, and I remember a guy wearing Arab headdress pretending to be a Bedouin for a fancy dress party. So the narrative. So this is just so powerful to get to tell our stories for ourselves, and it's just such a gift, and especially related to food, which is love, as Kou said So I was visiting my mom in London, and her friends would say to me, "So what did she cook for you?" Which is like, how much does she love you, is another way of asking that. So I'll just read a little bit here. When you go home, which for me includes visiting my uncle and his family in Texas, people ask what you want to eat. Shushtaheti. What do you yearn for? A specific word for yearning related to food. I took a class with Michael earlier this summer, and Michael asked us, who do you write for? And I wrote this for my dad, who's now passed. And so I want to read that part. 2 different dates. 4 years ago, on the 1-year anniversary of my father's passing, give or take a day or 2, I wanted to commemorate his life and express my love for him by cooking his signature dish, maklube, which means upside down in Arabic. I can never remember the exact date of my father's death because he passed on 2 different dates. When they called me, it was Tuesday in the early hours of the morning in Algeria, and in Minneapolis, it was Monday in the evening. These aren't just dates, they are distance. It matters because it means I wasn't there. The 8-hour time distance represents a geographical distance from Minneapolis to Algiers that needed to be bridged if I was to see him one last time and witness his burial. But there was also political distance. Since the war in Syria and the outpouring of Syrians fleeing for their safety, Syrians were not allowed to enter Algeria without a visa. And so for the first time in the 20-some years I'd been visiting him, to enter the country I needed a visa, which takes an obscene amount of time to get. It took traveling to New York, pulling a million strings, paying a bunch of money, and eventually it was late Thursday afternoon when I got to his apartment and collapsed crying in the arms of his best friend. It took 4 days to bridge the 8-hour time difference. On Friday, we buried him. So I want to read you an excerpt about my grandmother. I remember the eggs my grandmother, my dad's mom, would cook. They were the most delicious, and they came from the chickens in her yard. I vaguely remember the chickens. I vividly remember the eggs. Out of every taste in my childhood, I remember my grandmother's eggs the most. We'd have them for breakfast. She'd scramble them, softly scrambled eggs, salted. We'd have khubz, bread, pita bread, except it wasn't like the pita bread you get in the upper Midwest. It was round and flat and big. Instead of utensils or your individual plate, you'd have the khubz. You tear off a bite-sized piece of bread, fold it in your right hand, put the bread piece on the egg, and pinch or fold to scoop up the eggs with the bread and put them both in your mouth. We'd eat sitting on the floor in the same spot where my grandma, my sitti, would sleep, and I next to her, so content. The freshness of the eggs, the roughness of my grandmother's hands, but the gentleness of her touch. She'd scoop me up and sniff me and say, "You smell like Ahmed," my father, whom she hadn't seen since 1977 and would never see again, unless, of course, they're together in heaven. The eggs tasted more fully like eggs, more flavorful, and the texture creamy, fluffy. What I wouldn't give to go back and have scrambled eggs and khubz with my grandmother. I always get excited to try the freshest farm eggs in Minneapolis. Currently, a friend sells us her friend's farm eggs. And they're good, but they're not as good as my grandmother's eggs.
I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just pretending like I know. Let's start with a joke. No. Thank you, Yung Shin. Thank you all for reading. Thank you all for being here. It is kind of a trip to be back in person, but it's really cool. Y'all can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I have my baby in the back. Hi, baby. Hi. My essay in this wonderful anthology is called An Unfortunate Mosaic. So I'll provide some context and read a couple different sections. So I grew up in Southern California. My dad immigrated from Mexico. So very early on, I'd always had this I was always sort of navigating my relationship with him and my relationship to Mexican and Mexican Americanness, I suppose.
and that only sort of became more so or accentuated once I moved to Minnesota. And so this essay sort of tracks two different narratives. One is in 2017, I believe, when I went to Mexico to on a grant to visit the hometown, my father's hometown. And then the other sort of narrative it tracks is like during the pandemic, just my observations of like authentic Mexican restaurants in the small town where I live, and just like that, the idea of authenticity just became an obsession of mine or fascination, and like I think my way of sort of my like avenue in which I sort of attacked identity again and thought about it. So those are the two threads in the essay, and then there's like some research bits that are in there that sort of help or hopefully layer the essay. So I'll start with, I'll read like two different threads, and I'll use like a piece of research as like a sort of epigraph. So this is from an essay called Adventures in the Picturesque. Just as the voyeuristic encounter is founded on dominance sustained by distance, the tourist's contact with the other has consequences that diminish foreignness and destroy authenticity. So here's a moment from me being in Mexico, trying to like, you know, connect with that authentic Mexican self of mine, whatever that sort of meant. I took a photo of a street vendor on a Sunday afternoon in Mexico City. In it, the elderly woman selling corn in a cup is only partially visible on the upper right corner of the frame. It's really just her face from the nose down. She's wearing a green blouse, sleeves rolled up. She seems grandmotherly to me, and perhaps that's why I think it would be easy to get a good photo. I try to get a shot of the roasted corn as she shaves over a pan, as she shaves cobs over a pan to be mixed with lemon and spices. I stand to her left, but close enough that when I lift the camera and snap the shot, she notices and gets mad at me for taking the photo. She yells something in Spanish. I back away, nervous and also upset, which surprises me. I step back and look around to see if anyone's watching, if anyone sees me there too. And now here is a moment from Mankato. If you visit El Mazatlan's website, you can watch their story through a 2-minute YouTube video. It opens up with traditional ranchera-style trumpet playing before the narrator, Karina Felix, tells us the restaurant opened in 2003 and is family-owned. A few moments later, a camera pans out over a busy restaurant at midday. Then it moves to a single family at a table, and one of the patrons summarizes his family's experience at El Mazatlan by saying, "It makes us feel like we're going on a miniature vacation." Then there's a montage of patron testimonies. They love the free chips and salsa. They love the enchiladas. They love the fajita, burritos, margaritas. Everyone loves that everything is authentic. At the end, Felix invites us to visit before the man who appreciates the miniature vacation returns for the final moment and says, "Muy bien." So I had sort of was writing through these two threads when I was listening to a podcast and stumbled upon the podcast, which is called Latinos for Lunch, which I really loved, and it's a podcast that ended now. But anyway, they mentioned this book called The Erotic Life of Racism by Sharon Patricia Holland. And in the introduction, Sharon Patricia Holland, who is a black woman, mentions this moment that sort of like starts the arc of that whole book, which is she is like the 1990s. She's sitting in a grocery store parking lot with her friend's daughter, and they're like listening to music in the car, windows down. Tupac has just died that week, so they're sort of talking about that. And this woman comes with her grocery cart parked next to them, this white woman, and asks them, can you move out of the space because I need to get my groceries and I can't with your car in the way. And Patricia Holland Smith or Sharon Holland says, we'll like keep our doors closed, so don't worry, you can do what you need to do. And the woman does it and sort of gets in her car and is about to leave. And then Holland and the friend, they get out and they start walking to the grocery store. And the white woman tells her, and to think I marched for you. And that sort of sets Holland into this like thinking of like what she says is that woman expected something from me. Usually one does not expect anything from a stranger. And so she kind of goes on to say, and I quote her, of the altercation in the grocery store parking lot, Holland says, that woman wanted a connection with me, one solidified through time and place by history and genealogy that she could readily attach me to. What happens when someone who exists in time meets someone who only occupies space, which is the way that Holland thought or viewed the woman seeing her. So I started sort of thinking about that, realizing that I in Mexico had done that to the woman selling corn, and also that I was sort of wondering about who am I in an authentic Mexican restaurant in the Midwest. So I'll read 2 more sections from those 2 different threads, and then yeah. But when the Mexican woman stood up from her work and escaped the frame to yell, what did her existence tell me about my own existence? And in Guadalajara, when I created a routine, when I went on morning runs, what did I notice besides locals hurrying toward the subway platform or teenagers skating at the park? The other tourists looking around, hoping to witness something authentic. On a Saturday in 2013, 3 months after moving to Minnesota, I'm sitting at a long table, which is actually just 3 regular tables pushed together by workers at El Mazatlan Mexican restaurant. It's the first time so many of the people from my master's program are out together. There's me and about 12 white people looking through menus. The only other people of color are the Latinx servers channeling through the restaurant, carrying trays of food and drinks. There's this feeling I can't ignore that I too am part of someone else's authentic Mexican experience, that my existence is being sucked into another time, another frame of reference captured there, not erasure exactly, but a dwindling of self. What I know is I'm Mexican, what I know is I'm American, what I know that day, what is familiar to me are the voices of men and women who work in the restaurant, who pick up empty glasses and drop off sizzling platters, warning people not to touch. I hear the servers speak to each other between tables. They sound like my father, my tios, my neighbors back in California. If this is someone's mini vacation, what role do I play? What service do I provide? My cracked and glued in mosaic self, muy bien. Just then, one of our waiters shows up on my left with a notepad and pencil. For a second, when he asks what I'd like to eat, we're framed there together. And what does that image make of us? If someone's looking, if someone were to take a photo to document the evening, who would we be? Strangers? Friends? Nothing? I consider answering him in Spanish, but I haven't decided what to have. Thank you.